I'm old enough to remember that we would expectantly wait in the mornings for the newspaper to land on the front porch, and it would always land hitting the door in such a way that you can hear it throughout the house. And when I was younger, I wasn't much interested in the editorial page or in the business section. I always went for two sections, the sports and the comics. Comics have completely migrated to a different platform today. People now go to stores and they buy comic books and whatnot. Not that those things didn't exist then, but people specifically went to a newspaper because they were syndicated with different kinds of comics. So if you were a certain age, you would read maybe Archie's, or you would read Snoopy or things like that. Older people had different comics different strips that they would read. But the competition amongst different newspapers to have exclusive comics was a thing. And people would buy a particular newspaper in order to read a particular comic strip. There was one that if you were a certain age, even if you enjoyed it, you didn't really get the message of it, and it was called Little Abner. Little Abner, see some people, Little Abner was a creation of an American Jew named Al Capp. His real name was Alan Kaplan. Al Capp created a character in Little Abner called Sadie Hawkins. Okay. Who was Sadie Hawkins? She was a mid-30s-year-old woman who was still unmarried, and she would go running around town chasing down men in the hope that they would ask her to marry him. Starting in the late 30s, early 1940s and 50s, there was something called Sadie Hawkins Day. Sadie Hawkins Day, I believe it was November 14th. I could be wrong. Sadie Hawkins Day was the day that women, they would actually stage women chasing after men through towns, college campuses, and they would have dances, and women would approach men and ask them if they would go for a dance or go for dinner. In other words, it was one day back then that women were allowed to be like men. They could be aggressive. If you see a rabbi in August after the fast day of Tisha B'Av, and if he or she looks distracted, a little haggard, it's because we're running from wedding to wedding. After Tisha B'Av, which was literally a week ago today, wedding season breaks out in full bloom. 3, 4, 5 weddings a week for a particular rabbi is not at all unusual. 2 weddings, 3 weddings in a day is not at all unusual. We run around to weddings. And in part, it's because in the 3 weeks before Tisha B'Av, we are not allowed to have weddings. It also happens to be that August is an august moment to have weddings. The weather is nice, people are off. But today is, be it a week after Tisha B'Av, today is the 15th day of Av, which is known historically in Jewish tradition as Jewish Sadie Hawkins Day. Al Capp got the idea of Sadie Hawkins from the 15th day of Av. In ancient Jewish tradition, we are told that on the 15th day of Av, that all the Jewish women who were single, they would head out into the fields. They would wear white linen garments. Why white linen? Well, today it's fancy clothing, but back then it was considered to be the simplest and poorest of wear. Why white? Because it was the cheapest. To dye things in color was very expensive. And not only that, but in Jewish tradition, we are told, the ancient rabbis record the custom that no one would wear their own dress. No one could have a dress commissioned for them because everything they wore on this Jewish Sadie Hawkins Day, Tu B'Av, known in Hebrew, the 15th day of Av, everything they wore had to be borrowed. And they would head off into the fields. And the men would be waiting. And there would be a voice of an elder calling out to the men, Su'u einecha, cast your eyes, not on the beauty, but on the goodness. And so rightly in Jewish tradition, we are told that on this day was the day when shidduchim, as we would call shidduchim, that matches would be made. Here's the question. Why 7 days after Tisha B'Av? This horrible, horrible day in Jewish history that marks the destruction of the first temple and the second temple. And in that, a host of other tragedies that are marked specifically on that day. It should be noted that there was a fierce debate in early Israeli history about specifically not having a specific day to commemorate Holocaust remembrance, Yom HaShoah, but there was a significant voice, particularly amongst religious Zionists, that it should be folded up into, that is, the commemoration of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, it should be folded up into Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, the only 25-hour fast in Jewish tradition, with the exception of Yom Kippur. So why do we observe Tu B'Av, this Jewish Sadie Hawkins Day, but 7 days after, but a week after Tisha B'Av, this enormous, painful fast? It seems to me, since I'm spending a lot of time in weddings these days, that the symbol of what occurs particularly in a wedding captures it par excellence. At the very end of the wedding, after the rings are given, after the ketub has been read, after the cantor has sung, after the rabbi has spoken, there is one last tradition that we have to do, and that is the breaking of the glass. It should be noted, of course, that the breaking of the glass wasn't always a tradition, that a former professor of mine, Daniel Sperber, who wrote a brilliant series of books on Jewish traditions, that there was a custom also that instead of a glass, that people would break a plate, and the plate often would have a Jewish symbol on it, particularly a Magen David, and they would throw it at the corner, in one of the corners in the synagogue or against the wall somewhere. But the breaking of something, now as we know, the glass is near universal, that the breaking of the glass explains the question. But within the breaking of the glass, this 19th century rabbi, his name was Rabbi Meir Israel Kagan, asks what seems to be a curious question. He goes, how could we permit the breaking of a good glass? After all, we know that in Jewish tradition that there is a prohibition against wastefulness. So he said, how could we permit people to break a good, perfectly good glass for what seemingly no reason? And he says, the reason why you have to break the glass, it says, l'ramez, he goes, that it should be a stirring within the couple, that they should give their attention and heart to an ethical idea. And what's the idea? The idea is that in life, and particularly Jews do this, I think really well, that life is only best understood as a mixture of joy and pain. If you think life is only going to be something filled with promises that are fulfilled and sweetness, you will live, but you will never experience life. And if life is only going to be something afflicted with pain and disappointment, you will live, but you will never touch and experience life. We experience both seemingly at almost the same time, because one can only be appreciated by the other. The polarities, the dualities of life are well understood in the human condition, that we only understand heat because there is cold. We only understand life because there is death. And by the same token, within the course of life, we appreciate that pain and joy are closer cousins, siblings, so to speak, in life than we even begin to imagine. But at the wedding, and also in this month, we are asked to understand and comprehend it in its fulsomeness. This idea is also carried in a deeper sense. If you listen, next time you go to a Jewish wedding, the Sheva Brachot, the 7 marital blessings are recited, and the very last one is almost a cut and paste from the words of Yirmiyahu Navi, of Jeremiah the prophet, who was an eyewitness to the destruction of the first temple. He says as follows, Mehera Hashem Elokim Yishama Be'arei Yehuda, that soon, speedily, it should be heard in the outskirts of Jerusalem and throughout the land of Judah, Kol Sason v'Kol Simcha, the sound of celebration and joy, Kol Chatan v'Kol Kala, the voices of the brides and the grooms. This mixture of the destruction of Jerusalem and the creating of Jewish families, of seeing the pain of Jewish history and destruction, and the joy and strength of Jewish life continuing through the building of Jewish families, is the recipe of how Jews have survived. It is seeing pain and joy. It is realizing that Jewish life can only exist not only by understanding the pain and the sacrifice that people have made to bring us to this moment, but also the determination of people in the face of darkness to continue to hope and build a Jewish future. Or as my grandmother used to say, she, who had decided in 1936, despite the advice of nearly everyone else in her family in Frankfurt, that she was going to pick up and leave and take my father and my grandfather along. And she would say to me, when you look at the back of a package of chocolate chip cookies, what are the most numerous ingredients? There's flour for sure, followed by sugar and then salt. She said to me, you can never, ever taste the sugar without a proper amount of salt. Shabbat shalom.